London, 1854. The Morning Post lay open upon the breakfast table, its pages displaying the sort of news that caused teacups to rattle in the hands of society matrons. Lady Eleanor Harlow stared at the printed words, her vision blurring as she read the announcement for the third time. Miss Eleanor Harlow, daughter of the late Viscount Harlow, is to wed Baron Westmoreland, the match to take place within the fortnight at St. George's, Hanover Square. Her hands trembled, causing ripples in her tea. Her marriage, announced to all of London before she herself had even accepted the proposal. Though in truth, no proper proposal had ever been made. "I see you've discovered our little arrangement," came her uncle's voice from the doorway. Lord Blackwood entered the breakfast room with the confidence of a man who had just secured an excellent business deal. "The Baron called yesterday while you were out. Everything is settled." Eleanor set down her cup with deliberate care. "Settled, uncle? I don't recall being consulted about my own marriage." "Consultation was unnecessary. Your father's debts have mounted beyond what I can manage. The Baron has agreed to settle them all in exchange for your hand." His thin lips curved into what might have been intended as a smile. "You should be grateful. Most women in your position would end up as governesses or companions. Instead, you'll be a baroness." "To the cold Baron?" Eleanor couldn't prevent the words from escaping. Everyone in London knew of Baron Westmoreland, a man so austere and forbidding that even hardened soldiers were said to quail under his gaze. A widower of 15 years who had never shown interest in remarrying. "His temperature is hardly your concern," her uncle replied coldly. "What matters is his wealth and his willingness to save this family from ruin. Your father may have been my brother, but his gaming debts are not my responsibility. You will marry the Baron, or you may find alternative accommodation immediately." The threat hung in the air between them. With no dowry, no connections beyond her uncle's household, and the scandal of her father's suicide still whispered about in drawing rooms, Eleanor had no options. She was 27, no longer a fresh young debutante, and firmly on the path to spinsterhood. "When am I to meet this man who has purchased me?" she asked, unable to keep the bitterness from her voice. "He calls this afternoon. I suggest you wear the blue dress. It's the most becoming of your limited wardrobe." With that parting remark, Lord Blackwood departed, leaving Eleanor alone with the newspaper that had so casually announced the end of her freedom. Baron Nathaniel Westmoreland arrived precisely at 4 o'clock, his tall figure imposing in perfectly tailored black as he stood in her uncle's drawing room. Eleanor had indeed worn the blue dress, not out of obedience but because she needed whatever armor she could muster. "Miss Harlow." The Baron bowed formally, his face a study in controlled indifference. He was older than she had expected, perhaps 45, with silver threading through his dark hair at the temples. His features might have been handsome had they not been set in such stern lines. "My lord." She cursed, keeping her eyes downcast as propriety demanded. "I believe your uncle has explained our arrangement." His voice was deep and measured, each word precisely chosen. "He mentioned that you have purchased a bride to settle my father's debts," Eleanor replied, lifting her gaze to meet his. "How very medieval of you, my lord." A flash of something, surprise, perhaps, crossed his face before the impassive mask returned. "I see candor is among your qualities, Miss Harlow." "It is one of my many flaws, according to my uncle." The Baron studied her for a long moment. "I prefer honesty to false simpering. Our arrangement is indeed a business transaction, but I have no wish for you to view it as imprisonment. You will have your own household budget, control over domestic matters, and freedom to pursue appropriate interests." "How generous," she murmured. "And what will be required of me in return for these freedoms?" "To maintain the dignity of the Westmoreland name. To manage my household at Thornfield Hall. And in time." He paused, a slight discomfort showing in the stiffening of his shoulders. "An heir would be beneficial." Eleanor felt heat rise to her cheeks. Of course. A man of his position needed an heir, and his first wife had failed in this most essential duty. I understand, my lord. Do you? His grey eyes assessed her with uncomfortable perception. I doubt that very much, Miss Harlowe. But understanding will come with time. The wedding will take place next Tuesday. My solicitor will meet with your uncle tomorrow to settle all financial matters. With that, he bowed again and departed, leaving only the faint scent of sandalwood and the certainty that Eleanor's life had been irrevocably altered. The wedding was a brief, cold affair. Rain lashed against the windows of St. George's as Eleanor spoke her vows in a clear, steady voice that belied the turmoil within. The Baron's responses were equally firm, his expression giving nothing away as he slid a heavy gold ring onto her finger. There was no wedding breakfast, no celebration. By afternoon, Eleanor found herself in the Baron's carriage, traveling north toward Thornfield Hall in Derbyshire. They spoke little during the journey. The Baron read papers from a leather portfolio while Eleanor watched the landscape change from urban sprawl to rolling countryside. We will arrive by nightfall, the Baron said as the afternoon light began to fade. Mrs. Winters, the housekeeper, will show you to your chambers. I've had the Baroness's rooms prepared for you. The previous Baroness's rooms? Eleanor asked, unable to hide her surprise. A shadow passed across his face. They have been closed for 15 years. It seemed appropriate to open them now. I see. Though she did not. Why would a man who had clearly avoided remarriage for so long suddenly decide to take a wife? The debts her father had left behind were substantial, but surely not enough to tempt a man of the Baron's wealth into an unwanted marriage. As if reading her thoughts, he spoke again. You wonder why I chose this solution to your family's financial troubles. The question had crossed my mind. The Baron set aside his papers. I require a wife to manage my household and social obligations. You need financial security and protection from scandal. It is a logical arrangement. Is that all marriage is to you? A logical arrangement? For the first time, she saw something like uncertainty in his expression. What else should it be, Lady Westmoreland? The use of her new title startled her. Some might hope for companionship. Perhaps even affection. Those are luxuries not all can afford. He turned his attention back to his papers, effectively ending the conversation. Eleanor gazed out at the darkening landscape, wondering what sort of prison awaited her at Thornfield Hall. The hall proved to be less a prison than a mausoleum. Grand and imposing from the outside, inside it felt like a place where life had stopped. Furniture sat shrouded in holland covers, draperies were drawn against any hint of sunlight, and a pervasive chill seemed to emanate from the very walls. Mrs. Winters, a thin woman with a perpetual frown, led Eleanor through hushed corridors to the Baroness's chambers. These rooms haven't been used since her ladyship passed, Mrs. Winters said, her voice barely above a whisper. The master gave instructions to prepare them for you, though I can't say I understand why. She always said these rooms were cold. The previous Baroness? Eleanor asked. Mrs. Winters nodded. Lady Sophia. Delicate thing she was. Always ailing. The master never recovered from losing her. Eleanor absorbed this information as they entered a suite of rooms that, despite the fresh linens and newly lit fires, felt distinctly unwelcoming. Heavy burgundy draperies, ornate Victorian furniture, and somber portraits created an atmosphere of oppressive formality. Will there be anything else, my lady? Mrs. Winters asked. No, thank you. I shall manage. Left alone, Eleanor moved to the window and pulled back the drapes. Darkness had fallen completely, but she could make out the silhouette of formal gardens below, their symmetrical patterns visible in the moonlight. A soft knock at the door drew her attention. Expecting her maid with hot water for washing, she called, "Enter." Instead, the Baron himself stepped into the room. He had removed his coat but still wore his waistcoat and cravat, as formal as he had been during their journey. "I trust you find your accommodations satisfactory," he asked, remaining near the doorway. "They are very grand," she replied diplomatically. But not to your taste. It wasn't a question. Eleanor hesitated, then decided to maintain the honesty he claimed to value. They feel rather like a museum exhibit, my lord. As if no one has lived in them for some time. No one has. He moved further into the room, his gaze sweeping over the furnishings with a distant expression. These were my first wife's rooms. Perhaps it was a mistake to place you here. I can adapt to my surroundings, Eleanor assured him. Though perhaps, in time, I might make some small changes. The Baron's jaw tightened. These rooms have remained untouched since Sophia's death. I would prefer they stay as they are. Yet you expect me to live in them? You are the Baroness Westmoreland now, he said simply, as if that explained everything. Eleanor felt a flicker of frustration. I am also Eleanor. A different woman entirely from your first wife. Something flashed in his eyes, anger, perhaps, or pain. That much is abundantly clear, madam. You need not fear I will confuse the two of you. He moved toward the door, then paused. I shall leave you to rest. Breakfast is served at 8. Good night, Lady Westmoreland. The door closed behind him with a soft click that somehow felt more final than a slam would have. Eleanor sank onto the edge of the bed, the enormity of her situation settling over her. She had married a stranger who clearly still mourned his first wife, and she was expected to live in the shadow of a ghost. Days at Thornfield Hall fell into a pattern. The Baron spent his mornings in his study managing his estates, then rode out to inspect his lands or visit tenants. Eleanor was left to her own devices, exploring the vast house and grounds, becoming acquainted with the servants, and attempting to breathe some life into the oppressive atmosphere. They dined together each evening, their conversation limited to polite inquiries about each other's day and occasional discussions of household matters. The Baron was unfailingly courteous but remained distant, retiring to his library immediately after dinner. A fortnight into this arrangement, Eleanor ventured into territory she had thus far avoided. My lord, might I inquire about your expectations regarding social engagements? The Baron looked up from his plate, his expression guarded. What sort of engagements? The local gentry must surely call on a new bride. And there will be invitations to dinners and balls. As your wife, I should represent the family. I have little interest in society, he replied. My neighbors learned long ago not to expect my participation in their gatherings. But surely as the Baroness, you are free to accept such invitations if you wish, he interrupted, though I will not accompany you. Mrs. Winters can provide you with names of acceptable families. Eleanor set down her fork. It would be most unusual for me to attend social functions without my husband. I am not concerned with what is usual. His tone made it clear the subject was closed. Later that week, however, a note arrived from Lady Hampton, a neighbor whose estate bordered Thornfield to the east. It contained a warm invitation to tea, specifically addressed to the new Baroness Westmoreland. When Eleanor mentioned the invitation at dinner, the Baron frowned. Margaret Hampton was a friend of my first wife. No doubt she's curious about you. All the more reason to accept, then, Eleanor suggested. It would be discourteous to refuse her first overture. The Baron studied her for a long moment. Very well. Jenkins will drive you tomorrow. The following afternoon, Eleanor found herself in Lady Hampton's elegant drawing room, facing a barrage of barely disguised curiosity from her hostess. We were all quite astonished when we heard Nathaniel had remarried, Lady Hampton said, passing Eleanor a delicate porcelain teacup. After Sophia, he seemed determined to remain alone. Life often takes unexpected turns, Eleanor replied diplomatically. Indeed. Lady Hampton's sharp eyes assessed her. And how do you find Thornfield? Rather gloomy, I imagine, after London. It has a certain stately charm. Stately. What a generous description. Lady Hampton leaned forward conspiratorially. My dear, you must find it dreadfully oppressive. Nathaniel has kept that house like a mausoleum since Sophia died. Eleanor sipped her tea, unwilling to criticize her husband to a stranger, no matter how accurate the assessment might be. Lady Hampton seemed to take her silence as confirmation. Has he told you much about her? About what happened? Only that she died young, Eleanor answered carefully. A tragedy, to be sure. She was only 24, and they'd been married barely 5 years. Lady Hampton sighed dramatically. He was a different man then. Charming, sociable, one might even have called him warm. Sophia's death changed him entirely. Eleanor felt a flutter of curiosity. In what way did she die, if I may ask? I've heard only that she was delicate. Lady Hampton's expression grew serious. Childbirth, my dear. She lost the baby, a son, and then her own life shortly after. Nathaniel was never the same. He blamed himself, though heaven knows why. These things happen, tragic as they are. The revelation struck Eleanor deeply. No wonder the Baron avoided any discussion of children beyond his initial mention of an heir. No wonder he had remained unmarried for so long. He must have loved her very deeply, she murmured. Oh, desperately, Lady Hampton confirmed. It was quite the love match, despite their family's objections. Sophia was the daughter of an impoverished earl, beautiful but without fortune. The old Baron was furious when Nathaniel insisted on marrying her. Eleanor absorbed this information silently, her understanding of her husband shifting. The cold, distant man she had married had once loved passionately enough to defy his family. I tell you this not to distress you, Lady Hampton continued, misreading her silence, but because someone should prepare you. You've married a man who gave his heart away completely many years ago. I fear there may be little left for you. Eleanor returned to Thornfield deep in thought. The Baron was not at dinner that evening, having been called away to one of his tenant farms where a fire had broken out. Alone in the vast dining room, she found herself studying the portrait of her predecessor that hung above the mantelpiece. Sophia Westmoreland had been beautiful indeed, delicate features, golden curls, and a sweet, somewhat melancholy smile. She looked like a woman from a fairy tale, ethereal and fragile. Everything Eleanor, with her tall frame, dark hair, and determined expression, was not. Later, unable to sleep, Eleanor donned her dressing gown and wandered through the silent house. Her restless steps led her to the library, where a light still burned despite the late hour. The door stood ajar, and through the gap, she could see the Baron seated at his desk, head bowed over what appeared to be a small portrait. She should have withdrawn, respecting his privacy, but something held her in place. Perhaps it was Lady Hampton's revelations, or perhaps simply the rare opportunity to observe her husband unguarded. He spoke suddenly, startling her. You may enter, Lady Westmoreland, rather than lurking in doorways. Embarrassed at being caught, Eleanor pushed the door wider. I apologize for disturbing you, my lord. I couldn't sleep and thought to find a book. The Baron gestured toward the shelves that lined the walls. Help yourself. My library is at your disposal. As she moved into the room, she noticed he had quickly put away whatever he had been looking at. The action confirmed her suspicion that it had been a miniature of his first wife. I met Lady Hampton today, she said, running her fingers along the spines of leather-bound volumes without really seeing them. And no doubt she regaled you with all the gossip of the county, he replied dryly. She mentioned your first wife. Eleanor turned to face him directly. She told me how she died. The Baron's expression hardened. Margaret Hampton always did have more tongue than sense. Why didn't you tell me yourself? It is not a subject I care to discuss. Eleanor took a step toward his desk. We are married, my lord. Shouldn't there be some measure of honesty between us? Honesty? He rose abruptly, his height imposing in the lamplight. Very well. Yes, my first wife died bringing my son into the world. A son who did not survive her by more than an hour. Is that the honesty you seek? The pain in his voice was so raw that Eleanor flinched. I'm sorry. Your sympathy, while no doubt genuine, is unnecessary. It was 15 years ago. Yet you keep her rooms untouched. You avoid society because it reminds you of her. You still carry her portrait. Eleanor's voice softened. Time hasn't healed your grief, my lord. He turned away, presenting his back to her. We all carry our burdens, Lady Westmoreland. I suggest you find your book and return to your chambers. Is that what I am to you? Another burden, she asked quietly. His shoulders stiffened. You are my wife. In name only. A transaction, as you said yourself. When he turned back, his expression was carefully controlled once more. It is what we agreed upon. Is it? Eleanor challenged. Because I don't recall agreeing to live with a ghost, my lord. Nor to be housed in rooms that serve as a shrine to your first wife. I may have entered this marriage out of necessity, but I did not agree to disappear within it. For a moment, she thought she had gone too far. The Baron's jaw clenched, and a muscle twitched near his temple. Then, unexpectedly, his expression softened slightly. You are right. The admission seemed to cost him considerable effort. It was unfair to place you in Sophia's rooms. Choose any other suite in the house, and it shall be yours. Redecorate as you see fit. It was a small concession, but more than she had expected. Thank you, my lord. Nathaniel, he said suddenly. When we are alone, at least, you might use my given name. Eleanor felt a strange flutter in her chest. And you might call me Eleanor, rather than Lady Westmoreland. He nodded, a ghost of a smile touching his lips. Eleanor, then. Good night. Good night. Nathaniel. As she left the library, book in hand, Eleanor felt as though something significant had shifted between them, though she could not have said exactly what. The following weeks brought subtle changes to Thornfield Hall. Eleanor chose a suite of rooms in the east wing, overlooking the rose garden, and set about making them her own. The Baron, Nathaniel, as she now thought of him, provided a generous allowance for new furnishings and raised no objections to her choices. More significantly, he began to spend time with her outside of their formal dinners. He showed her his prized collection of botanical specimens, gathered during travels in his youth. He invited her opinion on plans to modernize tenants' cottages. Once, he even accompanied her on a call to Lady Hampton, though he remained stiff and formal throughout the visit. Eleanor, for her part, brought light and life back to the neglected house. She replaced heavy draperies with lighter fabrics, filled rooms with fresh flowers from the gardens, and insisted on opening windows to admit sunshine and fresh air. The servants, initially wary of changes to their routines, gradually responded to her warmth and consideration. Only Sophia's rooms remained untouched, the door closed but no longer locked. Eleanor respected this silent boundary, understanding now that it represented not just grief but guilt. One evening in late autumn, as they sat in the drawing room after dinner, a new habit that had developed without discussion, Eleanor ventured into territory she had avoided since their confrontation in the library. Lady Hampton has invited us to her harvest ball next week, she said, setting aside her embroidery. I would very much like to attend. Nathaniel looked up from his book, his expression guarded. I have not attended a ball in 15 years. Perhaps it is time to end that particular exile, she suggested gently. He closed his book, marking his place with a finger. To what purpose? I have no taste for such frivolities. Did you once? She asked. Lady Hampton mentioned you were quite social before. Before my wife died, he finished when she hesitated. Yes, I enjoyed society well enough. Sophia loved dancing, music, company. I loved seeing her happy. The simple admission revealed more about him than any previous conversation. And now? Now I find little pleasure in gatherings where people speak much and say nothing of consequence. Eleanor considered her next words carefully. I understand your reluctance. Truly, I do. But we have been married nearly 3 months, and we have not appeared together in society even once. People will talk. Let them, he said dismissively, though with less conviction than he might once have shown. It would please me, Eleanor said simply. To attend as your wife. To dance, perhaps even with my husband. Something flickered in his eyes, surprise, perhaps, or uncertainty. You wish to dance with me? Is that so remarkable? We are married, after all. He studied her for a long moment. Very well. We shall attend Margaret's ball. Though I warn you, I may have forgotten the steps to all but the simplest country dances. Eleanor smiled, surprised and pleased by his capitulation. I'm certain it will come back to you, like riding a bicycle. I've never ridden a bicycle, he replied, the corners of his mouth lifting slightly. But I take your point. Lady Hampton's ball proved to be a turning point. Eleanor spent more time and attention on her appearance that evening than she had for any previous occasion. Her gown of deep blue silk had been ordered from London specifically for this event, and her maid arranged her dark hair in an elegant style adorned with silver pins. When she descended the staircase to meet Nathaniel in the entrance hall, she saw him visibly start at the sight of her. You look. He paused, seeming to search for the right word. Magnificent. The compliment, unexpected and sincere, brought a flush to Eleanor's cheeks. Thank you. You look very handsome yourself. And he did. His evening attire suited his tall frame perfectly, the severe black emphasizing the breadth of his shoulders and the silver at his temples. Their arrival at Hampton House caused something of a sensation. The music faltered briefly as heads turned to observe the notorious recluse Baron Westmoreland and his new wife. Lady Hampton, delighted by the success of her invitation, made much of introducing Eleanor to everyone of consequence in the county. Your wife is charming, Nathaniel, Lady Hampton said as they stood watching Eleanor converse with a group of ladies. Quite different from Sophia, of course, but perhaps that's for the best. He stiffened slightly. In what way do you mean? Oh, don't bristle so. I only meant that she seems more substantial. Sophia was lovely, but delicate as porcelain. Your Eleanor has backbone. She'll stand by you through anything, I'd wager. Before he could respond, the orchestra began a waltz, and Eleanor returned to his side. To her evident surprise, Nathaniel offered his arm. I believe I promised you a dance, he said. Eleanor placed her hand on his arm. So you did. They moved onto the floor, and Eleanor felt a flutter of nerves as his hand settled at her waist. They had rarely touched since their wedding day, and never with such deliberate intent. I may step on your toes, he warned as they began to move. It has been a very long time. I shall forgive you, she replied, smiling up at him. This once. But his concern proved unnecessary. He guided her smoothly through the steps, his natural grace returning as they circled the floor. Eleanor was acutely aware of his hand at her waist, the slight pressure of his fingers when he turned her, the scent of sandalwood that she had come to associate with him. You dance very well for a man so long out of practice, she observed. It seems some things are not easily forgotten, he replied, his eyes meeting hers with an intensity that made her breath catch. You dance beautifully. My father insisted on the finest dancing master in London, she said, trying to maintain her composure. He said a woman who danced well would never lack for suitors. He was not wrong, though it seems his financial acumen did not match his social wisdom. The reference to her father's debts, the reason for their marriage, broke the momentary spell. Eleanor's smile faltered. Nathaniel noticed immediately. Forgive me. That was thoughtless. No, you spoke only the truth. My father was reckless with money, particularly after my mother died. Gambling became his solace and his ruin. She had never spoken so openly about her family's disgrace. His hand tightened slightly at her waist, a gesture that felt oddly like comfort. Grief makes fools of us all, in different ways. The simple statement, with its hint of self-awareness, touched Eleanor deeply. For the first time, she felt they were speaking not as strangers bound by a contract but as two people who understood something essential about each other. The waltz ended too soon. As they left the dance floor, Eleanor was immediately claimed by other partners, while Nathaniel retreated to the card room. They did not dance together again that evening, but something fundamental had changed between them. Winter descended on Derbyshire with a fury, blanketing Thornfield in snow and ice. The household settled into cozy routines, with evenings spent before roaring fires. Eleanor read aloud from novels while Nathaniel listened, occasionally offering commentary that revealed a sharp wit she had not initially detected in him. They had reached a comfortable companionship, but certain boundaries remained uncrossed. They still maintained separate chambers. Nathaniel never called on her there, nor she on him. The subject of an heir, mentioned only once on the day of their betrothal, remained unaddressed. Yet Eleanor found herself increasingly aware of him as a man, not merely as the distant figure she had married. She noticed the strength in his hands as he turned the pages of a book, the rare smile that transformed his stern features, the intelligence in his gray eyes when they discussed estate matters. One evening, as snow fell heavily outside, Eleanor ventured a question she had long considered. "Do you ever think of traveling again? You spoke once of your botanical expeditions in your youth." Nathaniel looked up from the estate ledger he was reviewing. "Not for many years." "Why do you ask?" "I found some of your journals in the library," she admitted. "Your descriptions of Italy, Greece, even Egypt were so vivid. You seemed to take great pleasure in discovery." "I was a different man then," he said simply. "Were you? Or have you simply forgotten that part of yourself?" He set aside the ledger, regarding her with a curious expression. "You have a habit of asking uncomfortable questions, Eleanor." "Someone should," she replied, emboldened by the months of growing ease between them. "You've hidden away from life for 15 years, Nathaniel. Not just from society, but from joy itself." For a moment, she thought he would retreat behind his walls again. Instead, he surprised her. "Perhaps you're right." He rose and moved to stand before the fire, his tall figure silhouetted against the flames. "I made a vow, you see. After Sophia died." Eleanor set aside her embroidery, giving him her full attention. "What sort of vow?" "To never again seek happiness." He spoke so softly she had to strain to hear him. It seemed disloyal. As if by finding joy again, I would be betraying her memory. "That's a harsh sentence to impose on yourself," Eleanor said gently. "Surely she would not have wanted you to live half a life in her name." He turned to face her, his expression vulnerable in a way she had never seen before. "What would you know of what she would have wanted?" "Nothing specific," Eleanor acknowledged. "But I know that when we love someone, we wish for their happiness above all else." "Even from beyond the grave?" "Especially then, I should think." She rose and moved to stand near him, close enough to feel the heat from the fire. "Nathaniel, may I ask you something? Something quite personal?" He hesitated, then nodded once. "Do you blame yourself for her death? For Sophia's?" The question hung between them, dangerous and necessary. When he finally answered, his voice was rough with emotion. "Yes. I knew childbearing might be dangerous for her. The doctors warned us after she miscarried the first time. But I wanted a son." He closed his eyes briefly. "She was so eager to please me, to give me an heir. She never complained, not even when the pregnancy weakened her terribly." Eleanor's heart ached for him, for the burden of guilt he had carried for so many years. "You couldn't have known what would happen. I should have protected her. Put her welfare above my desire for a child." He turned back to the fire. "Instead, I killed her as surely as if I had wielded the knife myself." Without thinking, Eleanor reached for his hand. "No. Life is fragile, Nathaniel. Death in childbirth is a risk every woman faces when she becomes a mother. Sophia knew this. She made her own choice. His fingers tightened around hers. A choice influenced by her desire to make me happy. Perhaps, Eleanor conceded. But still her choice. To deny that is to deny her agency, her courage. He looked down at their joined hands, seemingly startled to find them entwined. You have a rather remarkable way of seeing things, Eleanor. I merely offer a different perspective. She hesitated, then added softly, one not clouded by 15 years of self-recrimination. For a long moment, they stood in silence, hands still clasped between them. Then, with gentle deliberation, Nathaniel raised her hand to his lips and pressed a kiss to her knuckles. Thank you, he said simply. That night, Eleanor lay awake long after retiring, her hand still tingling from the touch of his lips. Something had shifted again between them, something significant that she dared not yet name. Christmas brought further thawing. At Eleanor's urging, Nathaniel agreed to host a small dinner party for their nearest neighbors. The house was decorated with holly and evergreens, and for the first time in years, carols were played in the drawing room after dinner. Eleanor wore a gown of deep crimson velvet, adorned with the Westmoreland rubies that Nathaniel had presented to her that morning, a gift that had belonged to generations of baronesses. They suit you, he murmured as he clasped the necklace around her throat, his fingers lingering briefly against her skin. Better than they ever suited their previous owners. The compliment, and the warmth in his eyes as he spoke it, made her heart race. Thank you. They're beautiful. As is their wearer, he added, the words so quiet she might have imagined them had she not seen his lips move. Before she could respond, the butler announced the arrival of their first guests, and the moment passed. But throughout the evening, Eleanor caught Nathaniel watching her, his gaze lingering when he thought she wouldn't notice. After their guests departed, they stood together in the entrance hall, the house quiet around them save for the distant sounds of servants clearing away the remnants of the party. Thank you for indulging my wish to entertain, Eleanor said. I believe our guests enjoyed themselves enormously. It was not unpleasant, Nathaniel admitted, the understatement belied by the relaxed set of his shoulders and the slight curve of his lips. Though I credit the success entirely to you. You have brought a warmth to Thornfield that has been absent for too long. The sincerity in his voice emboldened her. I'm glad. I want very much for you to be happy, Nathaniel. He studied her face in the soft glow of the hall lamps. Why? Our marriage was a transaction, as I so coldly stated at its beginning. You owed me nothing beyond the duties we agreed upon. Perhaps because I've come to care for you, Eleanor said simply, her heart pounding. Despite our unusual beginning. For a moment, he looked almost alarmed at her declaration. Then his expression softened into something she could not quite read, vulnerability, perhaps, or hope. Eleanor. He reached out as if to touch her face, then let his hand fall. I am not worthy of your caring. I have been cold and distant, lost in memories of the past. Not always, she countered. Not lately. He took a step closer. No. Not lately. His voice had dropped to a near whisper. You have awakened something in me that I thought long dead. Eleanor's breath caught as he raised his hand again, this time allowing his fingers to brush her cheek with exquisite gentleness. May I kiss you? He asked, the formal question at odds with the intensity in his eyes. In answer, Eleanor tilted her face toward his. His lips met hers with gentle restraint that quickly gave way to deeper passion as she responded eagerly to his embrace. His arms encircled her waist, drawing her against him as the kiss lengthened and deepened. When they finally parted, both somewhat breathless, Nathaniel rested his forehead against hers. I never expected this, he confessed quietly. To feel this way again. Nor I, Eleanor replied, her hands resting on his chest, feeling the strong beat of his heart beneath her fingers. I married you believing it would be a union in name only. He drew back slightly to look into her eyes. And now? Now I find myself hoping for much more. His smile, a full, genuine smile that transformed his entire face, took her breath away. As do I, my dear. As do I. That night, he came to her chambers, not with the cool formality of a man fulfilling a duty, but with the passionate tenderness of a husband who desired his wife. Their lovemaking held all the intensity that had been building between them for months, Nathaniel's initial restraint giving way to ardor as Eleanor's passionate response encouraged him. Afterward, as they lay entwined in her bed, Nathaniel traced lazy patterns on her bare shoulder. "I should have come to you long ago," he murmured. Eleanor nestled closer against him. "Perhaps we needed time. To know each other. To build trust. Wise as always." He pressed a kiss to her forehead. "Though I have wasted precious months we might have spent like this." "We have time," she assured him. "All the time in the world." Spring arrived with a riot of new growth in the gardens and news that brought both joy and trepidation. Eleanor, suspecting her condition for several weeks, finally consulted the local physician who confirmed that she was indeed with child. She waited until evening to share the news with Nathaniel, uncertain how he would receive it given his history. They sat together in the library, her needlework forgotten in her lap as she gathered her courage. "Nathaniel, I have something to tell you." He looked up from his correspondence, immediately alert to the seriousness in her tone. "What is it? Are you unwell?" "Quite the opposite." She smiled nervously. "I'm with child. Dr. Parker estimates the baby will arrive in late October." For a moment, Nathaniel sat perfectly still, his face unreadable. Then, to her surprise, he crossed to her chair and knelt beside it, taking both her hands in his. "Are you certain?" he asked, his voice tight with some emotion she couldn't identify. "Yes. The doctor is quite confident." He closed his eyes briefly, and when he opened them, she was startled to see tears gathering. "Eleanor, my love, this is wonderful news." "Is it?" She squeezed his hands. "I feared you might be concerned. Given what happened before." "I would be lying if I said I felt no fear," he admitted. "But my joy far outweighs it." He reached up to caress her cheek. "You have given me so much already, life, warmth, love. This child is yet another miracle I never dared hope for." "We shall face whatever comes together," Eleanor promised. "And all will be well." Nathaniel rose and drew her to her feet, enfolding her in a gentle embrace. "Yes. All will be well." In the weeks that followed, Nathaniel's protective instincts emerged full force. He insisted on the best physicians, monitored Eleanor's diet and activities with loving attention, and even began renovations on the long-neglected nursery. Most significantly, he finally ordered Sophia's rooms to be cleared and redecorated. "It's time," he told Eleanor when she questioned the decision. "Time to put the past to rest, to make room for our future." Together they sorted through Sophia's belongings, Nathaniel sharing memories without the crippling grief that had once accompanied them. He kept a few meaningful items, a miniature portrait, her favorite book of poetry, a pressed flower from their wedding day, and donated the rest to charity. "She would approve, I think," he said as the last trunks were carried away. "She never did like to see things go to waste." Eleanor, now visibly showing her pregnancy, slipped her arm through his. "I believe she would be happy to know you have found peace at last." He covered her hand with his. "Thanks to you, my love. Only thanks to you." On a crisp October evening, as the leaves turned golden on the great oak that stood sentinel outside Thornfield Hall, Eleanor gave birth to a son after a difficult but ultimately successful labor. Nathaniel, who had paced the corridors for hours, was finally admitted to her bedchamber where she lay pale but triumphant, their newborn cradled in her arms. "Come meet your son, my love," she said softly. "He has your eyes, I think." Nathaniel approached the bed with reverent steps, his expression a mixture of awe, love, and lingering fear. When Eleanor placed the swaddled infant in his arms, his hands trembled slightly. "He's perfect," he whispered, gazing down at the tiny face. Absolutely perfect. What shall we name him? Eleanor asked. We never did decide. Nathaniel considered for a moment. Thomas, after your father? I know, despite his flaws, you loved him dearly. The thoughtful suggestion brought tears to Eleanor's eyes. Thomas Nathaniel Westmoreland. It sounds quite distinguished, doesn't it? Indeed it does. He returned the baby to her arms and sat carefully on the edge of the bed. Eleanor, I have something to say to you. She looked up at him, momentarily concerned by his serious tone. What is it? I love you, he said simply. I should have told you months ago, but the words seemed inadequate. You have brought me back to life. You have made me whole again. Eleanor's heart swelled with joy. And I love you, Nathaniel. With all my heart. He leaned forward to kiss her gently, then rested his forehead against hers. Our marriage may have begun as a convenience, but it has become the greatest blessing of my life. And mine, she whispered, their son nestled between them. And mine. Outside, the first snow of winter began to fall, covering Thornfield Hall in a blanket of white that gleamed in the moonlight, not a shroud of grief, but a promise of new beginnings.